Welcome. If everyone will just come and please take our seats, we'll get started here soon. It's always just such a time trying to make it, and we've done it a couple of years in the rain. So I'm really glad that we had wonderful, nice weather for our panelists to walk over on. I am Sarah Anderson, and I am the Executive Director of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance. And thank you so much for being here. We're thrilled to have you here, especially with JP Morgan and all the different events that are around. We really are very just so pleased that you have chosen to come be with us. For those of you who are new to the Alliance, we have Bay Area roots, and we're shaped by kind of the ethos, the innovation ethos that's here, but we're really a global network now. We are a cross-sector membership network with more than 100 member organizations spanning geographies. And I think we're about at 17% LMIC-based organizations that we're really pleased with. And we're bridging technology, industry, finance, and with traditional global health stakeholders. Our members include tech companies, pharma, investors, startups, NGOs, academic members, and public sector partners. About 40% of our members are focused on digital health and technology, just to kind of give you an idea of who we are as a network. We were founded a little bit before 2020, and that was our first year to kind of really move forward was 2020, with the simple idea that one organization, one sector really can't address the complex global health challenges that we have in front of us, and that we really need to work together. And it seems just even more relevant now in the stage of where we are with global health. So scaling innovation, reaching patients, delivery, supply chain, all those things, navigating policy, all those things don't happen with one sector. It happens at the intersection. And the Alliance really doesn't build products and we don't deliver health services. We act as the connective tissue and we serve as a neutral convener so that we can really connect people, bring people together, serve as a trusted neutral convener so that we can kind of have the right spaces for some really candid conversations and to kind of gather the insights that are needed to move forward with global health innovation and equity. We served, just so for those of you who don't know, for many years, we served as the Secretariat of the WHO Tech Task Force during the pandemic and beyond. We serve as a strategic partner of Advancing Health Online, and we've hosted an ongoing series on AI and global health, really to talk honestly about AI and where there is real promise and where maybe we don't have promise yet and what's working, what's not, and try to have some really concrete conversations. And we'll be continuing that series this year. Last year, we really helped our members navigate the policy shifts that were happening in global health, and we continue to kind of figure out where do we go from here, and that will be another part of our conversations. And increasingly, we've been focused on financing and investment conversations, and JP Morgan has been a big part of that over the last few years. And this is the third year the Alliance has been asked by JP Morgan Healthcare Conference to come and build a panel. And while JP Morgan, I think most people know about the deal making and kind of the pipelines and all that part, what we're really proud of is that there are a lot of strategic questions that are being answered and surfacing during JP Morgan. And we're just really pleased that we have been able to add to the conversation how important strategic investments are in emerging markets and how that it's really a good deal too. Before we begin, I just wanted to have a few thank yous. First of all, we're deeply grateful for Natasha, for Chardonnay, who has been helping her, and for Accenture for hosting us and having us here tonight, and for their partnership. And, you know, this is I've had at least 2 or 3 people who've come to me, "I've been to this building before," right? I was like, "Yes, we are so lucky." So thank you so very much. And our sincere thanks to all of our panelists for staying with us. I know you must be tired after having an amazing conversation just an hour ago and staying with us at this late hour. We really appreciate it. And I also want to thank our staff, to Lisa, to Abby, to Aliana, and our thought partners and board members. And for those, just so you know, if you have any questions about anything, will those staff members that are here and the board members that are here raise your hand so that people can know to come to you? And if you were a previous board member, raise your hand. So if people need to know about the Alliance, they'll know where to go. We hope all of you who are new to the Alliance enjoy today and kind of get a feel for what this community is all about. And for our long-term partners, and I see many of you here, just thank you. We wouldn't be here without you all. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Natasha, who's going to guide us through the discussion and introduce our panelists. Thank you.
I think we have one extra chair up here, so you sorted it out. I'm going to take some extra space over here for me. This is wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your great opening, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Accenture San Francisco office for those of you that haven't been here, and welcome back to the Accenture office for those of you who have joined us here for some of the Alliance's past events. I am so honored to be here as your moderator for today's panel discussion, From Products to Patients: How Capital, Data, and Partnerships Unlock Growth in Asia and Africa. As Sarah mentioned, prior to the side event, this same esteemed panel spoke at JP Morgan with a focus on women's health in Asia. We discussed some of the demographic shifts and patient demand and digital platforms and financing innovations that are converging to create these rich commercial opportunities. What we want to do this evening is, one, broaden that conversation to an incredible global health audience sitting here with us today, but also to broaden that lens, to think across healthcare systems in both Asia and Africa, beyond women's health as well, and just really explore what it actually takes to translate growth potential into investable, scalable health outcomes across both regions and across all patient populations. For those of you that did have the great fortune of attending JP Morgan, you will have heard a lot of pharmaceutical leaders talking about portfolio discipline, about shifting R&D priorities, and about the pressures to identify durable growth engines beyond traditional markets. We also heard a lot of the providers talk about workforce strains and rising chronic conditions and the need for new care models. And then the investors were asking really hard questions about risk and timelines and returns. This session sits at the intersection of all of those conversations. I'm going to ground us by starting with a couple of fundamentals so that we're all starting from the same place. The first is demand is structurally expanding across both those regions, Asia and Africa. So in Africa, we're seeing healthcare systems facing the dual disease burden. Infectious diseases remain prevalent, while non-communicable diseases are on track to become the leading cause of morbidity and mortality by 2030. This is creating sustained demand for diagnostics, for medicines, for chronic care management and supply chains, often simultaneously. In Asia, that epidemiological transition is already well underway. Chronic and lifestyle diseases are rapidly rising across emerging markets, driven a lot by those aging populations, urbanization, and changing behaviors. So Asia is no longer just a demand story. It's also a global innovation engine where we're seeing more than 40% of global innovative drug pipelines in the region, up from less than just 30% less than 5 years ago. So this has a lot of implications, not just for local markets, but for where R&D and trials and manufacturing and commercialization are increasingly anchored. The second point I want to ground us in is patient engagement, and digital infrastructure. They're both accelerating adoption and monetization. Asia Pacific is now the fastest growing region for patient engagement solutions, largely supported through national digital health infrastructure, EHR adoption, mobile penetration. And in Africa, the data shows that patients are often entering through pharmacies and through primary care systems, which is creating a lot of really interesting opportunities for digital triage, for patient navigation, for decentralized care models that can quickly scale and drive cost efficiency. And we'll hear a lot from some of the digital innovators that are doing exactly that on today's panel. Last but not least is on the capital requirements. These markets are becoming increasingly investable, and we'll hear a lot around that from some of our panelists as well. But Asia is now driving the vast majority of global growth in innovative drug pipelines, creating opportunities across clinical trials, manufacturing, commercialization. And Africa is asking for an estimated 11 billion by 2030 to build local pharmaceutical production capacity alone, which is creating a lot of really interesting space for private capital, blended finance, and a lot of the long-term partnerships that are going to be needed to make that happen, which was a strong theme that we had come out from our JP Morgan panel. So the implications and the takeaway is that growth in Asia and Africa is no longer about isolated product bets. It's about systems. And that is the theme of our conversation today. Systems that combine capital, data, digital platforms, and partnerships to convert that population-led demand into predictable utilization, durable revenue, and scalable returns. So we've brought together an incredible group of leaders who are operating across these regions, who have navigated the differences. They've tested some of the assumptions, and they've built models that work in the real world. We'll be exploring where's the growth the strongest, where's risk real versus perceived, and what are the lessons that travel between Africa and Asia, and which ones don't. My hope is that you leave this conversation not just with insights, but with clarity around where the opportunities lie, how it can be unlocked, and who do you need to partner with to do it well. So with that, let's introduce our fabulous panelists. First and foremost, we have Janet Dorling, Senior Vice President, Intercontinental Region and Gilead Patient Solutions. Next, we have Nafisa Jiwani, Associate Vice President, Health Initiatives at U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, also known in the global health world as DFC. Ed Booty, Founder and CEO of Reach 52. And at the end, we have Sid Goyal, CEO and co-founder of Nivi. Round of applause for our panelists, please. All right, panelists, I'm going to apologize. Some of these questions are going to feel a little repetitive, but you did such a brilliant job at JPM. I want to make sure that this audience hears some of those insights, but we're going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to start with some questions for all of you before we go into individual questions. So first and foremost, and Janet, I'm not going to make you go last again. I'm going to start with you this time. Push up on your mic. There we go.
Yes, there we go.
When you look across Asia and Africa today, where do you see the strongest growth investment opportunities in health?
Harkening back to the conversation we had earlier, you're going to hear a lot from me about partnerships. And I think the way that we've been able to create most value, not only for patients and communities, but also in general for Gilead, is through collaborating, and not just individuals. I'd say addressing the opportunities in Africa and Asia is, I'd say, a team sport. And so bringing together the right, convening the right groups to have really critical and insightful conversations about what we can do for patients and the healthcare ecosystem in those places has been the most valuable thing for us.
What are the investable opportunities within that?
Honestly, when you strengthen healthcare systems and you bring better care to patients, that provides opportunity for bringing more products there, having more support for innovation, and all of the things that honestly fuel Gilead's business as well. So I like to say it's very possible to have a meaningful impact and create value. And it's the best when you get to do both at the same time. Like, that's what we try to do everywhere.
Sure. So for us, I think at the agency, what we've done really well is infrastructure and health services and delivery. And so that's what most of our portfolio was. Since 2019, our portfolio has really increased in the manufacturing and supply chain space. And I would, at least I think in the next 10 years, I would assume that that's going to be an area that we want to continue to increase investment in. Where I think there's opportunity and that we really haven't scratched the surface enough in is really in this intersection of health and technology. And so I'm excited to sort of see what we can do more so in that space.
Yeah, so for me, we'll talk about Reach 52 later, but we do a lot in the supply chain space, so fully agree with that being super exciting. But no, I think big thing that I look at the gaps. I look at if GDP is rising and then countries are getting richer, people are going to spend more on health. Medicine access is getting better. Companies like Gilead and Big Pharma, but also generics, are making medicines more accessible and affordable. But I see diagnostics being a big gap. I mean, in most markets, including India and many countries, I see diagnostics being critical. Medicine access and big companies that have done a lot are doing more, and generics are coming. Supply chain is getting better. But I see gaps and exciting opportunities in diagnostic screening, medtech.
I think for us, direct to consumer, but I'll actually add on to that from my answer at JPM. I think these vertically integrated models where it starts with demand and then goes all the way through the continuum of care is quite interesting. I think we've seen that. I've seen that in India, especially. But these, getting all the way from awareness to action to adherence, I think is critical and is a big opportunity.
So many of you have worked across many geographies, both Africa and Asia. What surprised you most when you've applied your Asia playbook in Africa and vice versa? Talk to me about some of the nuances that surprised you. Sid, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, we got our start in Kenya. I think about a year and a half later, we moved into India. I think the biggest difference is, and we're a direct-to-consumer company. We're a patient engagement solution, messaging-based, WhatsApp-based. So, we're talking to large populations. I think there's a lot more noise in Asian markets amongst consumer populations. So what you get is the trust barrier is actually a lot higher in Asian markets than it is in African markets. We're able to engage consumers much more easily in places like Kenya and Nigeria, as opposed to India, where there's a lot more skepticism, if you will, that we have to overcome. So the trust barrier is a lot higher in Asian markets. That's what we've seen, at least from a consumer standpoint.
Ed, have you experienced that as well? And what might you add?
Yeah, probably. So yeah, we started off in Philippines, Indonesia, Myanmar. They're our first markets. Then India, and then now seven African markets. We're selling medicines and doing health worker education and screening. I think the two main differences, like I've genuinely processed this on the spot, is Asia has much more mature commercial infrastructure. So you want to work with a distributor or a contract manufacturing organization or some sort of commercial partner. I would say in general, India, Philippines, Indonesia have more mature commercial supply chain distribution manufacturing partners. However, we really struggle on the impact side, hiring public health people. There's been less donor funding historically. We would actually struggle to get digital health specialists that have done, our kind of global health kind of tech comparatively. Africa, we find it significantly easier to hire sort of global health types, Nairobi, real hub. So the impact side is harder. But yeah, medicines distribution, you're working with smaller family-run businesses, less mature commercial partners, less local manufacturing partners. There's a lot of money going into that. But as of now, there's less manufacturing. So I'd say Asia's more mature commercially, but less on the impact is how it feels, like comparatively. Africa, we find the impact side way easier, but the commercial partnerships are sort of lacking, not lacking, but less mature.
Nafisa, has that played out in your experience as you've been investing in different kind of opportunities across Asia and Africa?
I would say probably the same. Like I think that, the regulatory environment looks very different. And so when we're looking at investments, the regulatory environment in Asia is much more mature. But we're also looking at, I think the thing that frustrates me the most when we're looking at investments, especially when we're thinking about regional manufacturing in particular, is when people look at a place like India, with 1 billion people, and then compare it to a continent and say, well, there's 1 billion people on that continent. And so not understanding that the regulatory environment looks very different across several different countries. And so how do you look at investments there when you're looking at regional manufacturing is going to look very different than in a country like India. And so thinking about what are the incentives, what does the regulatory environment look like? And so for us, that's where it becomes more difficult sometimes to invest in a place where we want to. But, I think Ed is right. There's more maturity in some places in Asia.
Janet.
I agree with everything that's been said. There's, sometimes maturity means slower pace. And that can be a good thing, but that can also be challenging when you're really trying to provide access to something that's life-saving or life-changing. I think the cultural and social barriers are different in each place, which is probably obvious, but I think, not really understanding that as you're trying to partner and make impact is important. And then I think, what the government's priorities are also quite different. And that's, again, totally fine. But there are definitely key differences and all surmountable.
All right, so let's talk about how we surmount some of those challenges. I'm going to pick up on a theme that you reinforced heavily in the JP Morgan session, which was all around partnerships. What are the partnership structures that have been really critical to you across Africa and Asia? What are the barriers that you've been trying to overcome through those partnerships, and how has that helped you to accelerate your returns rather than dilute them?
Yeah, I think we actually talked as a group about aligning incentives and really being clear on what the priorities are and what you each bring to the table. So that's one thing that I think is a really important one to overcome. And then I would say as you're aligning those incentives, just realizing that you really need to have an ecosystem. And sometimes that's other global players. Sometimes that's, I would say, always local community-led partners, and really connecting the decision-making and those priorities down to what's the real way you're going to implement that. And people need to hear from their constituents of what's important to them. So I think that sometimes you're connecting the dots, or you're helping a group through that ecosystem of connecting the dots so that people can get really excited about what's possible.
So connecting all of those different partners takes time. Ed, one of the great points you made when we were in the JP Morgan session is that sometimes there isn't alignment around the timelines that it actually takes to do this. Can you shed light on the discussion that happened at JP Morgan and elaborate on that, connecting it to what Janet was just saying?
Yeah, so sort of touching on partnerships and also a bit of what we do and time. So yeah, well, different partners. We sell medicines in emerging markets. Many pharma companies don't register their products, so we help them register, do sales, marketing, and distribution. We work with about 240 odd distributors across India and Africa, bringing products, affordable products to patients. Work with Pfizer, Sanofi, Gilead, etc. Different commercial models for access. From product to patient. I'm sort of taking that quite literally. I often say our worst competitor is inertia. Companies just don't register their products in Africa or sell anything. So we're trying, if you want to, you set up your own office, you do it yourself. You have a team, you have an office, you work with distributors. So you set up a business. You could work with a distributor, just have a distributor run your business. That's very common in Africa. Companies just give it to a distributor, export, hope for the best. And increasingly, you've got some super cool commercial models. Gilead's probably one of the pioneers with like voluntary out licensing, where you actually say, we've got some cool tech, we'll have a local company manufacture it on our behalf. I love this kind of stuff. One company can't do it alone. Let the IP be manufactured, waive your patents, and have local partners promote your product with or without a commercial incentive for that. Sometimes it's good, sometimes there's a royalty, if you will. But yeah, all of the above takes time. We were joking, yeah, we have some partners that want to do six-month projects, 12-month projects. It takes a year or two to register a product in emerging markets. And if we're realistic, sometimes 3 years. So before you can even sell a product, you're talking 1, 2, 3 years. And then you've got to wait for traction, you've got to train doctors, you've got to go into market number 2 and number 3, and it's I think in 5 years. Everything I do it's 3 to 5 years to start. And a lot of companies don't have the patience. That's what we were talking about. So, change in share price dips, have to do some cuts. Often it's one of the first things to very often go is access teams. I've been through these cycles. But also just understandably, corporate patience is not long enough, and people have to say, we want to do this, and we are making a commitment for, in my view, at least 3 years. And
How do you,
to stay
how do you
the course.
change mindsets within corporations, within organizations, recognizing that long time frame is required in order for you to be successful? Any learnings that you can share with folks?
I think we talked about this. We talked about this the other day. Unfortunately, I think unfortunately, it's in the corporate DNA. Often it's when the CEO cares a lot, and you get some really passionate people within often one person in a company seems to really, really care, and they will drive it through their matrix complex hierarchy structure and make it happen. And it's a people thing. I mean, often it's finding the right person that really cares inside the business that will actually get it through. And I think a lot of that comes from top-down leadership, and you've got people like the Access to Medicine Foundation that are trying to influence that CEO scorecard. I think they're here. And that materially changes over time. If the CEO cares, the team start to care, you start to get these champions, and you get people that want to stay the course and make it happen.
Great shout out to Jay, who's in the audience with us today. Nafisa, I'm going to come over to you. Question to the audience. How many of you are familiar with DFC? Raise your hand. All right. Maybe we should do some baseline education. Nafisa, what is DFC? Who are they? How do they work?
Sure.
And tell us about the exciting investment opportunities that
Sure.
lie ahead.
So DFC is a U.S. government's development finance institution. And you might have heard in the news recently that we just completed reauthorization, which we've been patiently waiting for quite some time. And so what does that mean for us? We used to be able to invest only 60 billion total, and now we can invest over 200 billion, which is quite
Billion
with a B. And so, when we're looking at investments, again, when we're thinking about debt financing, our projects could be anywhere from 5 million to 8 billion. But when you think about our ability to now have our limit increased, it really does sort of change the way that we're thinking about our investments. Our institution has delivered over 500 million back to the U.S. taxpayer. So we really do look at investments that are commercially viable. We do care about an IRR. We do want to make sure that we get paid back. We do not provide concessional loans. I think that is a question that people have. So we are not a grant-making institution. And so what are the financial tools that we have? We have debt financing and political risk insurance, which is our bread and butter. It's what we've been doing for quite some time as an institution. It's what we know very, very, very well. There's very few institutions that provide political risk insurance, and political risk insurance is something that allows for a business to go into an emerging market where you might be worried about political unrest. And so when you think about, I have a project right now that's in the Ukraine, and so very, very happy that they had political risk insurance that they are 100% utilizing right now, given what's happening there. And so when you're thinking about going into a market where there might be political unrest, that PRI tool is quite critical. Debt financing, as I mentioned, is our bread and butter. We can do investments anywhere from 5 million to over 1 billion. In the health space, we do have $1 billion liquidity facility. So we have been able to leverage that in the debt space. And then in terms of the other tools that we have, we do investment funds, and we have equity. Again, with reauthorization, it's really exciting. We used to have only the ability to do 30% minority ownership, and now we can do 40%, which is an increase. And so that is something that, at least for us, we're quite excited about too, in terms of the equity tool that we have here at DFC. Other government institutions also have development finance institutions. I share that because we work closely with other DFIs as well. We do that so that we can share risk, or where there's an alignment in terms of the things that we're trying to achieve. The U.S. obviously is very interested in making sure that we think about U.S. interest and American innovation. But we also care about our foreign policy partners. And so where there's an aligned interest in that, we would look into investments into those countries. So those are the ways in which DFC can invest in terms of our health portfolio and the types of projects that we invest in. The first is around health services and delivery. So anything that is brick and mortar, think about hospitals, clinics, that sort of thing. That's that first bucket. That's where we can make investments. The second is around manufacturing and supply chain, and that can be diagnostics, therapeutics, it can be vaccines, but anything that is widget, med devices, anything that's in that space, and supply chain, we can go ahead and invest in that space, and we've really increased our portfolio size there. And then the third is this intersection of health and technology. And as many of you know, innovation is always going to be there before regulation, and definitely in the international space, that is the case for sure. But it's an area that we really want to increase investment into for sure. So those are the three areas that we can invest in. And then we do this alongside with other partners as well.
So you just mentioned a couple of different areas where you have excitement to invest. What are some of the commercial differences between the investments you're seeing in the infrastructure space versus the manufacturing supply chain space versus the health and tech space? Do those deals look different? Do you ask for something different?
Oh, 100%. So like I would say maybe a couple of things. One is, why would you come to a DFI? Why would you come to a development finance institution? Why would you not just go to a JP Morgan by yourself? And that's because you might want patient capital, or you might want patient capital and you're taking a risk that maybe a commercial bank doesn't want to take in by themselves. And so there's a world in which a DFI is really the right tool to be able to use for an investment. And so when we're looking at, let's say, the first bucket around a hospital, usually that is something that is a public-private partnership. And so the government will definitely be somewhere, providing either land or a tax incentive to increase capacity for the private sector to be there. And we would be interested because maybe there is U.S. innovation or U.S. tech coming into that hospital, and maybe there's a U.S. entrepreneur as well. Sometimes we have, universities from the U.S. that are trying to create best in class because there isn't access maybe to oncology or to cardiology, and that's an area where we might say, look, this is something that could complement the public sector, and so that's the type of investment. But those investments are going to be 7 to 10 years in terms of the type of loan that we're looking at. Manufacturing and supply chain, depending on what we're doing, again, a longer tenor is probably what you're going to want. Again, as a commercial bank is going to want to be paid back in 2 to 3 years, makes a lot of sense. They're going to want high commercial returns. We're going to be thinking a little bit about the economic development, and we're going to be thinking about the long-term investment that's being created that's there, and whether or not you're creating a new market that didn't exist. And that third bucket in terms of health and technology, that's usually where we leverage our equity tool or investment funds. I'm not to say that we don't use our investment funds for the other two, but definitely in that sort of third bucket where it lends itself well.
Sid, I'm going to come to you. We had a really good conversation at JPM around your direct-to-consumer model and the kind of data and insights you're generating and how that's enabled you to establish these really strong commercial partnerships where you're able to then advise them on the kind of access models and how to improve affordability and how to really expand patient reach. You also just talked about how you've had some cultural nuances in establishing patient trust across different markets. What have you actually learned around what drives actual health behavior change? And how are you using that to create even stronger commercial partnerships?
Yeah, complex question. And
I only ask the complex ones.
I think it's nuanced. Each country is different. Not everybody's the same. But I think the first step is establishing trust, and speaking in the language of the consumer. I think a lot of the challenge in driving behavior change is that it's often couched in language that's too technical for the average consumer. And so you might run a campaign and you might think it's effective. It covers all the bases. You've done this behavioral model and behavioral mapping and persona segmentation. But at the end of the day, a consumer just comes in with this simple question. And by the way, we haven't talked about AI a lot, but this is where, the AI can come in, is really that personalization layer. So I think the key to establishing trust is to be able to answer a question quickly. So that's our first, one of our first goals with Nivi. And, just a brief background, messaging first platform, to drive insight, which can then drive outcomes. And so we work over popular messaging platforms like WhatsApp. And so, people come in with a question, and then Nivi, the bot, has a conversation with them. So that's the first step, is answer that first question, establish trust, and then allow that consumer to really guide the conversation. And again, this is where the AI comes in, is, not everybody's going to go through the same journey, to get to, that referral for a particular product or a service. And so that's also where, let the consumer drive the journey as opposed to the bot driving the journey. So the bot is responsive to the consumer, and at the same time, it's still moving a person along a behavior change model. And then the third thing is connecting to actual care. If you're not, I think a lot of behavior change models somehow, for some reason, stop, at the point of, oh, okay, now you have the intent to take up care, and then they say, good luck. Especially in these markets where many consumers just even don't know where to get that care. Connection to care is critical. That's, really closing the trust loop. So I think it's those really three things: establish trust, allow the consumer to guide the conversation, and then connect to care, is critical, to really, creating behavior change at scale. And again, this is where the AI can come in, because you can personalize things in a way that no human could, manually.
I'm going to open it up to questions in 2 minutes. So get those questions ready. We'll have some mics roaming around, but maybe a lightning round, to spark the interest of our audience. Next 5 years, looking out, what is the trend that you're seeing across Asia or Africa that excites you the most when it comes to then being able to serve the healthcare market in a new and innovative way? Janet, I'm going to come to you because I always felt like I picked on you in the JP Morgan session.
So I'm not making noise. What am I excited about? I am excited about, I'm trying to not give you the same answer. I'm excited about
Those guys didn't hear the answer, so you can repeat.
Yeah. No, both the, people embracing some of the innovative technologies that folks on this stage are taking. And we are a technology company. We're an innovation-based pharmaceutical company, but we love to see this adoption, because we talked a bit in the last panel about bringing the same solutions to many of these markets is not going to work. And so technology has been a wonderful way to open up access to testing, to, if you want to know your status, if you want to get linked to care in different ways. So I think that's wonderful. And not just communities embracing that, but governments embracing it as well. And so I think when you bring those things together, I see a lot of uplift and opportunity as a result. So I'm happy to be on stage with people who are bringing some of that innovation.
Nafisa.
I think in an emerging market, especially when, Ed was talking a little bit about how countries are moving from low income to low middle income. And as you do that, you're living longer. And so the thing that I hear from, ministers of health, is, I don't know how to deal with NCDs, and I'm barely making it through dealing with infectious disease, let alone now having to deal with NCDs as well. And so I think that there's this opportunity to really rethink how you address areas like oncology and cardiac care in emerging markets, because it should and it will look different than what you see in the US and in Europe. And so to me, the opportunity to leapfrog in a way that you saw in the banking sector. So, in the banking sector in Africa, you don't see a whole bunch of, brick and mortar buildings where you go in to go and work with a teller and everything is done on your phone. I think that type of innovation is the type of thing that you see in emerging markets, which is hopefully what we'll see in the health space as well. And I'm really encouraged by the idea that folks like Gilead and others will create that type of innovation that will be appropriate for the markets in whether it's in Asia or whether it's on the continent, but things that are appropriate for NCDs that we haven't seen yet. And who knows, maybe those are the types of things that will come back to the US or to Europe because we've seen that there's a proven market in those places.
Ed?
Yes, I'm genuinely quite optimistic at the moment. I think if I talk about Reach 52, just very briefly, so we train health workers, do health education and screening. We had to build all that app offline because internet was, we've been around for 8 years, offline working. We sell medicines, we work with distributors, working with big pharma. The enabling, your point is 100% correct, but the enabling infrastructure in my time of building Reach 52, our app used to be offline, but now when I come to San Francisco, the internet's genuinely worse than Kenya.
Sorry.
I'm just like, what the fuck? I'm like, why can't I do a call in my hotel? It's like driving me a bit nuts. The Wi-Fi sucks. But no, we got 5G in India, affordable 5G. Kenya, you're getting 5G in rural areas. So that enabling infrastructure. Payments, we've sold bits of insurance over the years, not doing so much now, partly because premium collection was so hard. QR codes are bloody everywhere. Philippines used to be the most paper money place ever. Now, post-COVID, it's QR codes everywhere. Kenya, M-Pesa, QR codes everywhere. India, UPI, QR codes everywhere. So you've got this whole enabling infrastructure of 5G payments, more mature manufacturing partners, more mature distributors, and that is what can enable leapfrogs. And it's changed massively in the past 5 years. I think the second thing I'm super positive about is just there's been a lot of failure in the global health sector, like endless pilots of pharma access, a lot of stuff that hasn't worked, few big tech blow-ups, a lot of people raised $100 million and aren't here anymore, right? $500 million. I think a lot of that failure means we sort of know what's starting to work, genuinely. And there's a lot of stuff that's out, a lot of stuff that investors aren't backing. There's probably less money going into the sector right now. But at the same time, there are some things that are working. And I think we've sort of been through this pilotitis failure. Probably everyone in this room has had some element of it. But it means that there's this enabling infrastructure, there's more interest, and there has been some issues, and that does mean we sort of know what works. And I think therefore it's quite positive to push forward.
Sid, before we go to the audience.
Yeah, a couple things. Well, one, Janet's on the stage, so it's pharma changing their perspective on how to deliver their therapies into markets. These HCP insurer-driven models, yes, those are prominent here in the West, but those don't work in those markets. And the willingness to say, hey, let's try something different, right? I think that's quite exciting because that's really important. If you don't have the therapies and you don't have the companies willing to try something different, then things fall apart. Building on this idea of D2C, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think bringing the care to the home, that's really interesting also. That digital first, telehealth, connecting demand generation to telehealth, to concierge services, that is something, roads and infrastructure, you're never going to build enough buildings, for medical care. So can you bring that to the home? And there's a lot of work being done. Interestingly enough, in sub-Saharan Africa, I think that's where there's a big push to do it. We're working with an e-pharmacy chain called Mydawa, and we're trying to build an end-to-end concierge model that's digital first. So the care comes to the consumer. And so I think that's really another leapfrog opportunity is how do you get the care closer to the individual and personalize it?
Wonderful. I'm going to take 3 questions from the audience. Perhaps I'm going to take them all together, and then we're going to come to the panel to answer. So if you can just raise your hand, we have a roaming mic. Don't be shy. I know you're all trying to get to drinks, but
Hi, this is Fred. You were talking about getting, individuals in position that are motivated to push things through. On the receptive side, I'm curious what your experience is working with medicine control authorities and ministries and finding those individuals on the receptive side. I had some experience early with the HIV medications in Zimbabwe, and it was very inspiring to see when you have those sit-down conversations with leadership, how many people were willing to think creatively about how to move things quickly through what's usually an incredibly sclerotic path. I'm curious what your experience is and if there's efforts in that.
we'll look to see if there's any other questions. Oh, I see two's hand up. Oh, Sarah?
Oh, sorry. I want to say thank you for a great panel, and it just strikes me that you guys really represent all parts of the value chain, from farm and product, the patient education and registration, some of those upstream factors, and then direct to consumer, and then finally financing. I was wondering, through JP Morgan and kind of you guys talking together, is there a systems problem or an opportunity that you guys are really optimistic about, where all parts of kind of the sector you represent can come together and really make an impact for patients, whether that's a disease area or a systems problem?
Any other questions in the audience? Oh, I see one hand here too.
Hi there. Thank you. Charlene from Stanford Biodesign. I'd be curious about your perspectives on local infrastructure from an innovation standpoint. So like investing in the local innovators for themselves to build the next. I think that builds quite nicely on the local governments and systems.
Perfect. Okay, we'll pause here. Adding, I'm going to direct the first question to you. Maybe the systems problem or opportunity. We'll do a lightning round across you. And then on local infrastructure for innovators, I might come to the two of you at the end, given that you've been doing a lot of work on the ground. So let's start with you.
Yeah, no, so, well, yeah, we work with a lot of governments. We align with governments in every market, etc., as I'm sure all of us probably do. It's genuinely inspiring to see a lot of great partners that want to do a lot. Regulatory specifically, we haven't found any shortcuts. I genuinely believe this deeply. Often we'll go to a pharma company and they'll expect us to have some magic silver bullet. And genuinely, as much as it pains me on a daily basis to do dossiers and wait 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, it's there for good reason. And a country shouldn't give up their sovereign right to register a medicine. Just because US has approved it, I don't necessarily believe you should automatically have a right to sell it in every country. Maybe it could be accelerated, but yeah, it's a slow, there's openness. If you focus on gaps, I think if you're trying to launch the 10th generic that they already have, it's a very different conversation to if it's new, but it is a process and you should accept that process, I think. And I say that to most partners. Yeah, but somebody came up after the panel to say, what do we do? We've got this product and what do we do? You just got to do the registrations. I mean, it's not expensive. It's slow. But it takes time. But you're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're talking in the single digits sometimes, $5,000 to do this stuff. So yeah, I think for all the regulatory work, it's just plan for it, have an access strategy, and put the time in, and then it's kind of like wait, to some extent. But there's not, and government's willing, but it doesn't necessarily speed it up.
I'm going to bring Janet into the conversation.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think one challenge that I'm very cognizant that you face is you're getting things after the development has been done. But one of the things I think Gilead does extraordinarily well is because of our experience, we start with the end in mind. From day one, before we even write a clinical protocol, we're thinking about how do we create access. And so if you work that way and you bring truly valuable innovation, I know it's exception, not the rule, so I don't want to disagree, but we have found government stakeholders to be incredibly open to talking about creative ways to create access. whether it's through normal regulatory pathways or others. And I just want to put it out there that you don't have to give up hope. You should at least try to start the conversation. And when you have, great partners at your side, whether it's the U.S. government or Global Fund or others, I mean, thinking together, you can have pretty creative conversations. Again, when you're addressing really serious, and not to say that there's anything that isn't addressing, but I think there's some things that are more important to governments than not. And so just know what you have and don't count yourself out. I think if we hadn't had some of the conversations we have, we would have had a lot slower road to access. So one, be prepared if you can be. That's out of your control. And two, at least give it a try, because we've been, I can say, really impressed and grateful for the partnership that we've had.
Actually, I'm going to switch it up. Sid, I'm going to throw it to you for that third question around local infrastructure for innovators. What's been your experience?
I think now, we started in 2016. I think in a lot of ways, internet access, as Ed was saying, it's pretty easy to build a company in a lot of these places. As far as infrastructure goes, I think the biggest missing piece is just knowledge sharing. And so that's what one of the things we do, well, most of my team is abroad. There's only two of us here in the US, the two co-founders, but my product managers, so the people who build our product, the design and build our product are there. And so my experience with them is that they have a lot wider lens on the problems that exist and potential solutions than you might have seen 15 years ago. I've been working in emerging markets even prior to starting Nivi, and things have changed a lot as far as amongst people who they just move faster too, and I think that's exciting. Is when you're thinking about local innovation, is people are moving at the speed that you want to see, because that can help with the time problem. It doesn't solve it, and there are certain constraints, but I think there has been a strong evolution, because you see a lot more success in certain places, especially places like India. You see a lot more success, and success breeds more success. And so that helps a lot.
I'm going to use Tu's question as the very final question for this panel, because unfortunately we're already running out of time. Tell me, what is the systems problem or opportunity that excites you the most? Rapid fire. Janet, I always picked on you, so you're going to get to go first.
I think, like, can we get some of these things, like the connections that really make put the whole system together? You're talking about these different representatives. Can we get them a little more systemic? So my hope is once you put something together, that you can then run that playbook and run the system while continuing to make it better. I think the first time is the hardest. And so I would say, let's bring the ecosystem together in a little bit more of a reproducible way, so we don't have to rebuild it, and make some of these partnerships easier to access. I know you can't use the same one every time, but I think that putting all the pieces together, I think we could make that better, and then everyone can use it.
Nafisa?
Look, we're looking at investments where there is a clear understanding that there is economic development in the place that we're doing business. And so ensuring that if we're working with the government, and we're working with private sector, where I think there's a huge opportunity, especially in global health, as we look at the MOUs that are being put together. I think what was most surprising when there is the diminishing space of donor funding coming from USAID, what was surprising, I think, to me, even in this space, is hearing from countries that they appreciated the MOU process with State Department. And I don't think that was something that I was expecting. And I say that to you because this is the opportunity for private sector to come in to really create some sustainability in countries where there hasn't been. And so the opportunity to really work with the public system in a way to complement efforts, I think is huge. And we think about that when we're making investments as well, so that we don't have perverse incentives, as, you know, when we're thinking about whether it's healthcare services and delivery or otherwise. But I really think that while there are some really crazy things that have happened in the last year, I think there's really exciting things that are happening. And it's really encouraging to see governments happy about the MOU process and happy about being in charge of money that's coming to them, at least from the US. And that's been encouraging for me to see. And then again, you know, the opportunity for innovation in that private sector, whether it's coming directly from local innovators or coming from other places.
Ed,
So perhaps picking up on both the questions. So yeah, where does like the sectors coalesce? Like I'll take a bet that over the coming, I was just on the way over about the book Factfulness. Overall, there's been some backsliding recently, but under 5 mortality is going down. More medicines are becoming generic. Life expectancy is going up, including in emerging markets. Income and generally the world is getting wealthier. The world's going to be twice as wealthy by 2100. India is now the 3rd largest economy in the world. It's 8th when I set up reached 52. So generally, I'm going to say that basic healthcare, universal health coverage and so on will start to get better. Rightly or wrongly, I believe that positively. So therefore, where I think the sector might come together is, but what about innovation? I'm obsessed by the fact that 70% of cancer deaths are in LMICs. Low to middle income countries are responsible for 70% of cancer deaths. We're worried about AMR. There's new antibiotics coming out in the US. So if you have a drug-resistant infection, you are getting new modern antibiotics coming out here. They are not being registered in poor countries a lot of the time. So I'm really interested in where the private, philanthropic, whatever, blah, 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 everyone should come together in like the next big thing. And there'll be a lot of learnings that go into that.
in the NPD space.
Yeah, NCDs. Yeah. And then I think it will come down to NCDs, GLP-1s. That's going to be like the new access barrier. So yeah, I think the baseline is going to generally improve. But then what about the innovations or the real next big killers, which is going to be the cancers and the NCDs? And that's where I think everyone should and will coalesce, taking into a lot of account.
Good. Final thoughts.
Women's health. I think that, you know, McKinsey's done a couple different reports now, you know, and I think they've, you know, said they've done some modeling. You can unlock, you know, over $1 trillion worth of economic value by just dealing with women's health conditions throughout their lifespan, right? So I think this idea of this longitudinal care journey is something that can be really enabled in these markets, you know, as opposed to disease-specific care journeys that, you know, exist in the West. I think you can do longitudinal care, you know, really from the ground up in these markets, because there's so much fertile ground for innovation, and we're flying the plane as you build it, as they say. So I think that's the exciting part.
4 compelling areas to look out for. I know we've run out of time. We intentionally keep our panel discussions short because one of the great things about the Bay Area Global Health Alliance is they recognize the value of unstructured time, the opportunity to connect one-on-one and to network, and that's exactly where I want us to move into very quickly. So perhaps I will spend 30 seconds trying to summarize some of the great points that I heard across the panel in no particular order. First, I'm going to pick up on something Ed was talking about around the kind of learnings we've had around pilots. The constraint in Asia and Africa is no longer ideas or pilots. It's about executing at scale. We're not short of innovations. We're short of operating models that can move from tens of thousands of patients to tens of millions of patients without breaking. And so I'm so excited that we were joined today by both Nivi and by Reach 52, who are doing some phenomenal things. And I encourage you to chat with them in the networking session to learn more about their solutions. The second is this topic we talked about around NCDs. Chronic diseases are rising faster than systems capacity. And it means that there's this new leverage point, moving away from tertiary care into how demand is shaped and triaged and managed earlier in the journey. We are at Accenture. It would behoove me not to talk about data, technology, and AI, and thank you, Sid, for bringing that in. But the enabling infrastructure and data is becoming more ubiquitous in these markets, and it's creating these incredible opportunities to inform product design, procurement decisions, financing, and service delivery in near real time. And I think all of these opportunities create tremendous potential for each and every one of us in the global health community to drive incredible impact. And that impact is only going to come through partnerships, which is the big theme that Janet has reinforced, and through the right kind of capital, which I think Nafisa has really reinforced throughout our discussion. So a huge thank you to our panelists for joining us in today's discussion, for your great insights in JP Morgan. And I encourage us all to continue the conversation as we move into the networking. We have food and drinks to the left-hand side, but before we go, one more round of applause for our panelists.